Hello, and welcome to Locality's Making Bank podcast with host Keith Costello, co-founder and CEO of Locality Bank. Sit back, relax, and let South Florida visionaries take you on an entrepreneurial journey from tribulation to triumph as they share the very stories that have shaped them.
Lisa, Skye, welcome to Locality's Making Bank podcast.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
We're very excited to have you today with us. I, of course, am wearing pink today because it's Breast Cancer Awareness Month.
That's right.
And it's also National Women's Business Owner Month, which a lot of people don't know about. But
I didn't even know about that.
The SBA declared that, so I'm wearing pink, and hopefully we'll get this one out in October. Maybe not. Maybe early November. We'll see. Auntie will do his best. But in any event, it's October now. We're really happy to have Lisa here with us, another female entrepreneur, which are becoming less unicorns than they used to be, right? Thank God. We're finally, allowing women to really manifest their creative and business juices and start businesses and be successful just in a industry where you came up that was really male dominated, the real estate business, right?
Is male dominated still.
Absolutely. And still a lot are. So
yeah, we
have a lot to unpack. Lisa was employee number 2 at WeWork. So we're going to dig into that. But before we get there, I want to start out talking about your beginnings. I guess you're from West Palm Beach.
I'm born and raised Floridian. Yep. West Palm Beach. Bought a one-way ticket to New York City when I was 21 and never looked back. Was there for about 22 years. So
wow.
Yeah.
So tell me about your, growing up, because obviously, your parents, some influence led to what you're doing now, right?
Sure.
So tell me about your early influences and your childhood growing up. A little bit in West Palm.
Yeah. I actually just relocated back to Florida, which I never thought I would do. I've been, living in Miami Beach now for the last year or so and absolutely loving it. And I say I'm a Floridian New Yorker. And now that all the New Yorkers have moved to Florida, I'm right at home as a Floridian New Yorker, right? So, but I did grow up in West Palm Beach. My father started his business 6 months after I was born. It's an urban planning and landscape architecture firm called Urban Design Studio. And at this point, 45 years later, they've master planned, and been part of the development of probably 75% of Palm Beach County, which is a big deal. And though he passed, 18 years ago, which of course was also a big sort of informant of my life, the business has continued and thrived since he's been gone. So a few pieces of art in his honor up there in Palm Beach Gardens and in front of City Hall and in his memory. And so he was a big, influence in my life. And in that he owned his own company, I think my whole life, I've always wanted to own my own business. And I just sort of wasn't sure what kind of business it would be. And my background, I worked in hospitality and restaurants for about 8 years or so, and then a blip in television, which is what I studied at NYU. But then I've worked in different sides of real estate the last 15 years. And as you said, most notably as the second employee at WeWork, it was when I was with WeWork that I said, oh my goodness, we're essentially creating the physical iteration of what I had already been doing for a few years in a global business networking organization called BNI. We were bringing together all these different entrepreneurs from all different walks of life under one roof, so to speak. So just as in BNI, you have one professional per industry, per chapter, right, in this networking organization. In this building that we opened with WeWork, and then myself subsequently with my own shared office space business Primary in New York, you can walk down the hall and you have an interior designer next to a CPA, next to a branding and marketing expert, next to a shoe designer.
Next to a bank.
Next to a bank.
Like we have here.
Locality Bank. It's exactly right. Yeah. So for me, big part of my why in life is meeting people, learning who they are, what do they do now, what do they do before what they're doing now, and how can I add value by connecting them to other great people that I know as well. So it was when I was with WeWork that I said, this is the type of business that I want to own. Hospitality and restaurants, it's nights, holidays, weekends, it's a whole lifestyle change. But it was when I was with WeWork that I said, I would love to own a business like this. And I was 21 years old. I like to joke that I was in my platform, flip-flops and pastels right off the plane from Florida and had a list of the 10, spots that I should interview with, and Union Square Cafe, which I did not know was the #1 most popular restaurant in the Zagat survey at that time. I didn't know who Danny Meyer was. I went into an interview there, and I just loved the way that I felt. There was this warmth and sort of ingratiating, hospitable energy from the moment I walked in, and I said, oh my gosh, I want to work here. And I landed a job as a server there, and I had the great fortune of working with his company for the first 3 years I was in New York. I went to leave a year later. I thought I was going to go work in hotels, and Danny himself came to me. It was only Union Square Cafe and Gramercy Tavern in his empire at that point. Wow. So this was back in 1999. And he said, I'm opening this restaurant called 11 Madison Park, which then, 20 years later, 15 years later, went on to become one of the greatest restaurants in the world. He asked if I wanted to be part of the opening staff there. So I was part of the opening staff there. I worked with Dan Barber at Blue Hill. I managed at the Odeon in Tribeca for a year. And so I developed a really great pedigree. I worked with Charlie Palmer at a restaurant he opened here in Palm Beach. And so I think hospitality and sort of meeting and exceeding customer expectations, creating a feeling for people is something that I inherently had in me, but then was really honed by the training and skills that I was given at Union Square Cafe.
And so, what were you, front of the house at those restaurants?
Server. I was a server.
Server?
So I was a server, and then I was a manager at 11 Madison Park. I went back to Union Square Cafe as a server, and they also made me a trainer. So, at 23 years old, it was me and 5 men who were the other 5 trainers. And it was a very serious operation. We had 6 training shifts, and the way that it's funny. I just told this story recently, but most restaurants have a staff, and then they have bus boys to clear the tables, and food runners and beverage runners and that sort of thing. But at Union Square Cafe, and I think in a lot of Danny's restaurants, it's really set up and designed to be a team effort system. So there's only one back waiter, and there's all front waiters. So you bus your own tables. You partner with someone to help. You first prioritize your station, then you look at their station, then you look to see if you can help the food runner or the beverage runner. Can I clear tables elsewhere in the restaurant? Everyone really works together. We put up the chairs at the end of the night together. And it's sort of this team mentality from the start. And so when we would take people through those 6 training shifts, probably only 50% of folks who started the training shifts made it all the way through and were ultimately hired.
You don't want anybody on your island unless they're a superstar.
That's exactly right. It's exactly right. Yeah. Whereas in most restaurants, you can see you hit the nail right on the head using that word self-serving. In a lot of restaurants, it's like, I don't care if the guy next to me is in the weeds, and his station is going down in flames. As long as my tables are happy, and my tables are buzzed, I'm making money. Exactly. But this was everyone shared. We split the money evenly at the end of the night, and great. So everyone was in it to help each other. Makes sense, doesn't it?
It does. And, it's incredible when you think about the people that you met in New York. So Danny Meyer. All right, now we're going to go to the next very interesting person that you met, which is Adam Neumann. And so, but when you were at the restaurants, you started getting involved in B&I to kind of.
So I left the rest, and to give it just the highest level of the path, so to speak. I worked in the restaurant business while I was at NYU studying broadcast journalism. I like to joke that naturally, as a broadcast journalism major would, I went on to manage at the Odeon after I graduated, and then a year, after doing that, my general manager there said, "Lisa, you've always wanted to be in television. Go to television. Okay. Don't go back into the restaurant business," because I would have always had opportunities, right, in restaurants. But so I left the restaurant business. I did end up 3 months later landing a role as a correspondent on a news magazine format TV show for PBS. I got hired as a correspondent. A week after I started, the anchor quit and they made me the anchor, and I ended up anchoring 40 shows. And at the end of that year, I joked that I called my mom and I said, I can't pay my bills, but I'm on TV.
I wonder how many times that same conversation has gone on, right?
Totally. By the way, my intern who was with us back then, she's now like CNN, and she's been, NBC, and she's a big, anchor at this point, which is very cool, but she's been doing it 20 years, so take overnight success, right,
overnight
Keith?
Success.
Anyways,
20 years later.
So I was in the television business for just a blip. I went to go back to the restaurant business, and my father died suddenly. So Valentine's Day, 2004, my dad was on a motorcycle in Australia and hit and killed by a drunk driver.
Oh my gosh. I'm so sorry to hear that.
incredibly tragic and incredibly poetic because he was doing something he loved in one of the most beautiful places, on the planet, on a motorcycle in Australia, on the Great Ocean Road, just south of Melbourne. He had been, calling everyone. He had been there for 6 weeks. He did 3 weeks in New Zealand and then was 3 weeks into 5 weeks in Australia when, driving on the wrong side of the road. This guy from the US had arrived the night before and was wrong place,
tragic.
wrong time. And I got a phone call saying there's been an accident and, your father didn't make it. And that really, it was a trauma. I realize that now in retrospect, many years later, I realized that is what it was because my life was one way. And then this phone call, right, I received changed my entire life and it's informed the trajectory of my whole life. And so it was a very challenging year. I inherited a lot of responsibility on behalf of my younger brother and I was 26, he was 23. My dad had this 25-person urban planning landscape architecture firm, a home in Singer Island up in West Palm Beach. And so I spent the next year handling the estate. And then I went to go back into television for a hot minute, but I got my real estate licenses because I was now inherited my dad's home and I was just becoming more curious about real estate. And so it was there that I ended up with an opportunity to get into the mortgage business because I was getting my real estate license. And the guy who taught the finance portion of the course, Eric Barron, owned a mortgage company. And he said, "What are you going to do with your real estate license? Come work for me." And I said, "What's a mortgage?" And he said, "I'll teach you."
Yeah.
And so he brought me in on his personal team. I had a few years in mortgages. That was when I got into BNI because I knew I wanted to build a book of business. I wanted to get a bunch of people together. Excuse me. And so that, essentially I didn't know how I would get all of my people together. I had a friend of mine who was a financial advisor at UBS and we would talk every month and say, "Well, you know a bunch of people and I know a bunch of people. We should get our people together." Well, but how often would we meet and how would there be accountability and what would the agenda of the meeting be? I got invited to the startup of a BNI meeting and I said, "Oh my gosh, an agenda. I just have to invite my people, show up, bring my charisma, and I can follow this script and host a networking meeting where we can bring professionals together for business opportunities. Thank you so much for inviting me. How do I go start my own?" That was sort of what I said.
Yeah.
And so I went and launched my own BNI meeting. The story of how I met Adam Neumann is a really great one because I went into my BNI meeting one morning and I was opening the mortgage seat because this was in 2010, January.
Okay.
And the mortgage world had been flipped upside down.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what I was going to do next, but I was leading this meeting and I was president of the chapter. And so I went in one morning and I said, "I'm opening the mortgage seat. I don't know what I'm going to do next. I'm the president of this chapter. I'm not going to leave you. So I'm looking for opportunities and I'm going to lean into the group. And here are the things that I'm good at, et cetera, et cetera." That morning, the guest of a guest was Adam Neumann. And so 20 minutes after the meeting ended, we ended up standing next to each other. And he said, "Oh, I might need a mortgage." And I said, "Well, I don't know if you heard me, but I'm opening the mortgage seat." And he said, "Oh, well, what are you going to do?" And I said, "I want to do something that lights me up. I love bringing people together, creating community. I'd be a great brand ambassador." He said, "Well, I just took this building down in Soho. I'm doing this thing called WeWork. You should come check it out." And so I went that afternoon to meet with him for an hour. And then I went back 2 days later, met with he and Miguel for 3 hours. And 7:00 that Friday night, he walked me down onto Broadway and he said, or Lafayette in Soho, where the first building was. And he said, "We want you to start on Monday. We're going to pay you $70,000 cash under the table. We want to open the first 17 offices in 3 weeks and we want to be full with a wait list." And I said, "Whoa, let me think about it. I'll be in touch by Sunday." I called my partner in the mortgage business who I hadn't even told that I was ready to leave yet.
Yeah.
And he said, "You've been wanting to get out of the business for, a year or two. You should do it." And so I called Adam or I messaged him and I said, "I'm ready." And so 8:00 that Monday morning, I think it was February 1st, 2010, I started as their second employee. It was Adam and Miguel. Miguel's brother, Kyle, was there as the first employee and then me.
Wow.
And I worked harder than I had ever worked. And I'm a hard worker. For the next 14 months, to open and book the first 170 offices, which we did, and we were full in the first building. And then I moved on to the second building and opened half of that building in Midtown with them as well.
Wow. So Adam, before, that was when he was just starting WeWork, right?
Yeah.
So he had been doing something else, and I forget.
Green Desk. He and
Desk.
Miguel launched Green Desk in a building that was vacant in Brooklyn with a landlord who didn't know how to occupy the building. And so they did that, but then they sold that brand to that landlord. They signed a non-compete saying, we'll focus on Manhattan. You can stay in Brooklyn. And so then they went into Manhattan to launch WeWork. They were giving out employment contracts that had an 18-month non-compete. And I was the only one of the 25 employees that wasn't willing to sign the employment agreement. I said, if we reduce it to 6 months, possibly, but we were moving very quickly, very, very fast. I was not an equal partner, right? I didn't have any equity stake in the business. And I said candidly to them, who's to say I'm going to agree with all the decisions that we make? I'm honing all of these skills alongside of both of you, and I could be very happy opening 2 or 3 of my own across town. I don't need to take over the world. I think I literally said that, and then now apropos, because they went on to transform the world in this, in this sector in commercial real estate. And so
at the end of 14 months, you made the decision. I'm not saying I compete. I'll go compete.
Well, I didn't say that at that moment. What had happened is that I had a cookbook for charity called I Love Corn, which is 50 recipes donated by famous and award-winning chefs to create a cookbook that could raise money for children and young adults who lost a parent or sibling in honor of my father and my loss of my father. And so that book had gotten picked up by an international publisher. I was going to need to work on the manuscript. And this was just as I was contemplating signing the employment contract. So we ultimately framed it as, and it was true, that I was leaving to work on the manuscript, which was true. I spent the next 6 months working on the manuscript, making a lot of corn recipes. I needed to take a break from corn after those 6 months. I ended up leaving Corcoran to go spend some time out in Portland, Oregon with my mom, who was having some shoulder surgeries. I matched with my now ex-husband on Tinder, fell madly in love and planned an engagement and marriage and went on a 3-month honeymoon. Especially having lost my father suddenly, I'll tell you that I'm a big subscriber to the notion that, we can die tomorrow. Life it can be gone like this. And so how do I want to live today? How can I face my fears or lean into courage to do the things that I want to do? I think today is kind of a personal motto or philosophy that I really live by. And so going to spend that time with my mom was really important to me. Obviously, I met someone that I love, and I had always wanted to go to the places that my father had been when he died in New Zealand and Australia, and so that was part of that. That honeymoon was doing that.
Great little segment there. Live each day like it could be your last.
100%.
There's some cliche to that, but when you really think about it, there's so much meaning there, and it's a lesson for everyone to, we should think about that every day.
We are the ones who, as they say, should all over ourselves, right? I should be working. I should do this. I got to do that. It's our own self-infringed pressures that we put on ourselves. So why not work really hard and then take, like I just did, 6 months off? And then, because I know myself, look at this, before I know it, I'm back into hustle mode and I'm creating in the world, right? We're creators, right? And so anyhow, I went out, I had this honeymoon, I got back from honeymoon and I said, okay, chop, time to start working again. The bank account has been going like this. Time for it to start going like this.
That gets you out of that short retirement, right? When the bank account runs out.
That'll motivate you. That'll motivate you 100%. And as an entrepreneur, I'm used to sort of running on financial fumes occasionally and not afraid of it, knowing that I have the confidence in myself that I'm going to be able to create, income for myself again. And so I got back from honeymoon. I had been in touch with one of the seed investors from WeWork, someone named Joel Schreiber, who had been kind of keeping tabs on me after I left. And we were in touch. And I said to him, the truth is I'm ready to launch my own business. And he said, I'm ready to invest. Come back to New York and let's do this. And so I went back to New York. And within 6 months, I had solidified an operating agreement with him. He had agreed to seed the business with $6 million, which is what we had budgeted as the need for opening 2 30,000 square foot locations in the city, which is what I was comfortable with because that was the size of WeWork's first 2 locations as well.
Interesting.
So, and then we were off to the races looking for real estate and end of that year, which was 2015, we found the space at 26 Broadway, which is where we opened this business the following spring called Primary, which is a shared office space business, fully furnished, turnkey, month-to-month space, just like WeWork. And our differentiator is that we have an on-site studio where we host yoga, meditation, boot camp classes. We have a full-service juice and healthy food cafe, lots of live greenery, preserved moss walls. The motto of the business is you work best when you feel great. And so we wanted to create a space where people can feel great, because when you feel great, you are most productive, right? It flows through to your business and your life.
Sure. And so that aspect of bringing in the yoga and the exercise was new, really. I mean,
it was, now we see it everywhere, right? Because I think that it's certainly something that the pandemic accelerated for us, was this awareness around mental health, right? How do I feel? A lot of burnout. I'm someone who certainly suffered from, I think, feelings of burnout last year. I mean, with the pandemic, Primary, we filed Chapter 11. We were restructuring the business for 17 months. We were in Chapter 11. We came out of it in December. Thank goodness, the business still survives. I'm so grateful that that's part of the narrative, right? That I set out to create something, and that it has survived a global pandemic in the commercial real estate industry.
Right. Well, so I have my two older daughters live in Manhattan. So, we're up there every few months. And, so I think the last time we were there was in maybe late May. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting to see how much the city had come back. Yeah. And how busy it was. And, we couldn't get around, which, we were complaining. They were like, no, this is great.
Yeah. Well, the comment that I have on that as someone who's in commercial real estate in New York, though, is that although, yes, there's vibrancy on the streets, and I think the addition of the external structures on the sidewalks with all the restaurants, which has given a really beautiful sort of European feel to New York City streets, has been wonderful. And there are a lot of people out on the streets, but it's inside the buildings that we don't see as many people.
So let's talk about that a little bit. So the work from home, right?
Yeah.
That has really changed everything. And, you have all these big company CEOs saying, everybody's coming back to the office, and everybody's saying, no, we're not.
Yeah.
So talk about that and how that's affecting both commercial real estate in New York and also Primary.
Yeah. We're still, I think, figuring it out, right? Yeah. I mean, this is we're making it up as we go, and we're learning as we go. And I have a couple of comments, of course. I think that hybrid is here to stay, right? Companies have now realized that they can have their employees and teams be as effective, if not potentially in some industries more effective with their employees at home, because they now don't have 2 hours of commute time, right? Now they can go work out in the gym. Back to you work best when you feel great, right? Now their team can spend quality time with their family that they didn't have before. They can spend quality time with themselves, taking care of their bodies, so that way their minds are sharp, they're more productive and effective in their job. So, from an employer standpoint, again, in certain industries, how can you argue with that if the business is generating more revenue, right? Because of greater productivity, why would you have your employees come back into an office, right? Playing devil's advocate a bit, right? That said, I do think, and you hear me saying certain industries, I think that there, and this is where it's business to business, owner to owner, industry to industry. Nothing replaces you and I sitting here together, right? Keith, you and I both, I'm sure, have been guests on or hosted podcast interviews behind screens, right? Where we've said
we had somebody try to do that to us yesterday. We said, no, you have to come in.
Yeah, at the end of it, at the beginning of the pandemic, I was interviewed. I remember I was out on Shelter Island at a friend of mine's, place, and we were en route to moving to Portland, Oregon, because that's something that I did at the end of 2020 for 9 months before coming to Miami to be in the same time zone now again as New York, and an agreement that I have with my now ex-husband, that we would not be in New York City anymore. Okay. And but in the same city as one another with our 2 kids. Uh-huh. I think that it's a consideration to have your employees at least come in for an all hands once a quarter, once a month, and for some companies that's 2 days a week. I think that there's this term that I love, accelerated serendipity. I think there's an acceleration of serendipity or creativity that will happen for certain industries and businesses if their employees are in person, right? Mm-hmm. If they're in a war room together, they're in a meeting room together, they're sitting next to one another in an office. That won't happen if they're in solitude in their home.
that's another really great piece of advice. And we like being here too because, as a bank, I mean, there's so many businesses located here. So for us, it's great.
No brainer.
But we have, when you've got to hire people and you're small like we are, you're a startup, you need somebody. If we have 20 employees. We got somebody in Tennessee. We got somebody in, Orlando. We have people all over.
Yeah.
Because we have to. Now, would I rather have everybody here? Yeah. But it's not going to work. So
but you're going to get them together in person.
We do get them together. Yeah. We get together every so often and, hopefully everybody will be here for a holiday party in a few months. And
that's exactly right.
Look everybody in the eye and
that's exactly
size them up.
Yeah.
Just like you're saying.
Yeah. Again, not malicious intent. It's human nature. It's human design. It's an interesting time where I think that, coworking is just at its, sort of start. It's, 10 years down the road, it's continuing to hit its stride. I think JLL predicted that by the year 2030, 30% of all commercial real estate globally would be flex or shared office space. And I think we're likely still on that path.
What about your future and what are you thinking for your future now?
Well, stabilized primary has been, our number one goal right now.
Check that. And we got that done.
Yeah, we do. Again, in Manhattan specific, we've seen Midtown come back at a much faster clip. I think occupancies are back up to 80, 90%. We're down in the financial district where, again, I'm friendly with a lot of peers, other operators in the industry. And so, we're sitting at a lesser, 60% or so occupancy. And so I think it's just been a slower comeback downtown. But I'm very happy we've stabilized the business, as I said. Sure. And that said, for me personally, I took 6 months off. I'm one of the 5 board members at Primary now. And I've just recently launched an advisory. Right now, I see myself being the wind beneath other people's wings for a hot moment. I like to say I have kind of big cheese DNA, but I'm ready to not be in charge for the moment. Yeah. And there are a lot of great entrepreneurs up to a lot of great things in the world. Yeah. And I bring a lot of value because of my deep, wide network, my experience with fundraising, but strategic introductions and partnerships. I took a 9-month course in positive psychology and now have a certificate in applied positive psychology. I'm naturally, because of my upbringing with my mother, a positive person. And now I have the understanding, the study behind what can help you to shift your mindset into being a more resilient or positive sort of person, right? Or leader, entrepreneur by default. And so I'm bringing these skill sets to other entrepreneurs. And now I have 3-4 clients and building this business, but always open to opportunities and to look to even bigger picture and to tie it back to flex office. Yeah. It was disappointing to me to have my business go into bankruptcy, obviously. Yeah. It was disappointing to me, though I don't know the founders or the nuances of the inner workings of The Wing, which was another female-founded business, ironically, ultimately funded at one point by WeWork. There's another brand called The Riveter. These are female-founded flex office space operations or co-working operations that have now either consolidated or gone out of business. Uh-huh. And so certainly someone, a woman who's raised $10 million at this point now myself, I have been incredibly privy to the notion that women and minorities do receive less than 2% of the funding. And I want to be a part of finding the allies and advocates. I love the way you started this interview, finding the men who are in positions of power, who have the financial access to be conscious of the ways that they can empower women, fuel women and minorities to rise in the business world.
Wow. Well, that's a great message. And, we're happy to help in that too. So we're glad to have met you and be able to talk to you about that. So what advice do you have for our female entrepreneur listeners?
Yeah, thank you for asking this question because I was asked on another podcast, what was my favorite part of being CEO of Primary? This was a few years ago. And I said, if you would have asked me in the beginning, it was just that I had this dream and vision that I brought to fruition. But now years down the road, I think what is best for me is that the best takeaway is that I get to now be an inspiration for and vehicle for advice to other women and minorities in business, entrepreneurs. So I would say I have a new theory, actually just developed in the last week, Keith.
Okay.
I think that a big part of why only 2% of the funding goes to women and minority-owned businesses is because they don't make the ask. I think that, and what I mean by that is that I think that women in particular, I was just having this conversation with another woman a week ago who was telling me, she literally in this conversation said, I don't know, the idea of fundraising is so daunting to me, the idea that I would have to be responsible for someone else's money and repay that money. And I said, stop right there. It's that I think is what stops people from making the ask. Investors know there's risk. They know they may never get this money back. This isn't the last penny to their name. You're not going to put them into shambles if they never get the money back. And the reality of entrepreneurship and business ownership is that, yes, you may take investment and your investors may never get their money back. But if you don't make the ask and you don't receive the funding that you need to get the vision going, you're never going to get there. And so I think being able to let go of a certain level of responsibility, and knowing that of course you're going to work hard and do everything you can to make this a profitable, viable business, not only for yourself but also for your investors, is what you're going to do.
I just want to jump in with one thing,
Yeah.
which is, I've had friends. One friend in particular who started a business and it didn't work out through no fault of his own, and he wanted to leave town. And so one of my mentors said to him, and he told me this story, he said, you're not leaving town. You have nothing to be ashamed of. You didn't do anything that was, you had integrity. You did the best you could. You didn't cheat anybody. You didn't lie to anybody. You should be proud. You did the best you could.
Yeah.
You can face your investors. There's nothing to be ashamed of.
Making the ask, being willing to take the risk is huge. I think for women also, not feeling like you need to explain yourself. In other words, assess what you need first and declare what you need in negotiations and talks. In other words, this is something that I would do, is I would think, what do I need in this negotiation and in this deal? And will it work for everyone else involved? I have seen that I don't believe that men do that as much. I'm not saying that men aren't compassionate and empathetic, and there's varying degrees of all humans on the planet, right? And level of empathy and compassion and tactics of negotiating business and what have you. But I think that simply stating what you need to make the deal work for yourself is so critical, and leaving it at that, and leaving it to others to decide whether or not the deal points and terms work for them. It's not my job to figure out how can this deal work for me and everyone else involved. Everyone else, we're all grown-ups here, right? We're all putting on our big boy and big girl panties, in the morning and adulting out there in the world. And so I think that I was guilty for years of thinking, how can this work for me and everyone else involved? And I think I've learned as a business owner now, how can I simply stay focused on making the ask, having courage, but taking care of myself? What's best for me and my family as it relates to this negotiation, and trusting that anyone else I'm negotiating with, they'll come to the table with what they need.
Yeah. Now we're going to go to the lightning round.
Oh,
which
great.
is just some rapid fire questions.
I love these.
That first thing comes to mind.
Sure.
So favorite quote?
Where attention goes, energy flows. Napoleon Hill.
I like it. Very nice. Wow. And Napoleon Hill, great.
Yeah.
Happiest moment and lowest moment in business?
Happiest moment in business, I think, was when I raised the subsequent $3.5 million on top of the $6 million seed, because I fundraised for a year. I spoke to probably 100 different VCs, individuals, high net worth, folks, and starting to see that money come into the bank account. I remember seeing at one point $1.7 million in our bank account, and I thought, we're finally moving in the right direction again. That was a huge relief in business. And then lowest point, I think, global pandemic. My God, the day that we went on to shutdown in New York City, I took a video and I said, all right, everyone, I'm here in New York City and we've evacuated the building and I'm going home and I don't know when I'll be coming back. And little did we know that, 3 months that we would be not in our office. And we had just finished our opening a few months earlier. We had just achieved 98% occupancy in the business. And we were on path to do $7 million in revenue. We were.
When we think back to those times, it's the concept of this too shall pass comes to mind, right? Like how bad was that? Like for everybody, like you really, particularly New York, I think was the epicenter. Certainly in the United States of that. So incredible.
But to have worked so hard to get to where I think, okay, we're almost moving towards the promised land. I mean, it was then that I say, like, okay, universe, like a global pandemic card stacked against me. You're the captain, I'm the vessel, lead me where you want me to go. Like that was part of my, sort of affirmation. Like, all right, it's in your hands.
And you're still here.
And I'm still here. I'm still here. Yes.
So what about, take it a little lighter now.
Yep.
Netflix or a movie, a series you're watching? Anything?
Oh God, I'm watching Billions right now.
Billions, love it.
I'm in season 4 of Billions. Someone told me I had to watch it, and I am loving it.
So, how about books? Any books you would recommend?
Books I would recommend. Gosh, I mean, again, I like some of the classics for me are 4 Hour Work Week. Rich Dad Poor Dad was one that I would go to. I really do love Simon Sinek's Start With Why. Here's one that's a Bible, especially if you're in the hospitality or customer service industry, Setting the Table. Danny Meyer's Setting the Table. I know people who've read it 5-6 times.
I think not just hospitality, but any business.
Customer service.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes.
And I've got that on my to-read list. Yeah. And you just reminded me, I'm going to make sure I jump on that one.
Yep.
How about, what do you do to relax? Hobbies?
Oh my gosh, so many things. I have a few workout classes that I love, but a hot yoga. When I sweat, they say the cure for everything is salt, sweat, tears, and the sea. Have you heard that? That's another one of my favorite quotes. And so a good sweat makes me feel like I'm getting all of my toxins out. So I do a hot yoga. I do a creative movement class on Wednesday mornings with a number of other women. Which is sort of just movement and like boot camp almost. And then yoga is a part of that as well. I go in the jacuzzi a lot. I go in the ocean a lot. So just water. Water is a big theme for wellness in my life. Florida. I'm so happy to be here. You can immerse
yourself in water here.
I'm thrilled to be here.
And so last, what about a favorite restaurant?
I have two. But for sure, the Odeon. I managed there in 2002 for the entire year, December 2001 to 2002. And when I'm in New York now, I always go. I mean, frisee salad, moule frites, the French fries, the chocolate pudding still tastes the same as it did 20 years ago. Yeah, but the Odeon is my go-to.
And what about down here? You got any favorites down here?
Oh, it's funny. Well, it's funny. I did just hear Adam might be an investor, but Pura Vida, and that's just more fat.
Which is
They're all over. They're like 17 or 20 locations now.
Anyway, Lisa Skye, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah,
and
thank you
so much. Thank you for sharing a lot of your experiences. It's going to help not just our female entrepreneurs out there, but all of our entrepreneurs who are listening. A lot of good advice for men there too about show the emotion. You pick a lot of good stuff out of this, Anthony.
Yeah.
So, thank you so much.
Thank you, Keith, for having me.
All right.
Yes. And congratulations again, Locality Bank.
Thank you.
Yes. Here you go again.
Wow. That was an incredible story. Lisa Skye, number 2 employee from WeWork. Wow. That story about how she met Adam Neumann. $70,000 in cash. I mean, I love that. You're hired. And then she also worked with Danny Meyer in New York City, the great restaurateur. So, entrepreneurial woman, then went out, left WeWork, started her own business, had a lot of good advice for raising money, went through bankruptcy during COVID, brought her company out of bankruptcy, and said, as a woman, don't be afraid to make the ask. So to all you female entrepreneurs, but also all you male entrepreneurs, a lot to learn here from Lisa Skye. Check it out on the Locality Bank Making Bank podcast, available on Spotify and all other major apps. Reach out, check us out, localitybank.com. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in for Locality's Making Bank podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform to catch the latest episodes, and visit localitybank.com today to learn more about all the benefits of banking local.